The morning sky over Kepler 442b burned red with smoke and fire. Commander Zarakai pressed her back against the twisted metal of what used to be a mining crawler. Her blue scales were covered in dust and dried blood. Some of it was her own. Most of it belonged to the friends she had lost in the past 6 days. Around her, the other survivors huddled in small groups behind whatever cover they could find. The central habitat dome was cracked in 3 places. The air recyclers still worked, but barely. Every breath tasted of smoke and fear. Zarakai counted the faces around her for the 100th time today. 212 colonists had been here when the Vorthak ships first appeared in the sky. Now only 43 remained alive. The rest were either dead or taken away by the insect-like invaders for reasons she did not want to think about. Lieutenant Kethlow crawled over to her position. His antenna drooped with exhaustion. Dark circles surrounded his large eyes. Like everyone else, he had not slept in days. "Commander, the eastern wall is about to fall," he whispered. "The automated guns are down to 15% power." "Maybe less." Zarakai nodded slowly. She had expected this news. The defense systems had been holding the Vorthak back for days, but nothing lasted forever. Especially not when facing an enemy that seemed to have endless numbers and no concern for losses. "What about the distress beacon?" she asked. Kethlow shook his head. "Still broadcasting on all frequencies. No response from anyone. The truth was simple and terrible. No help was coming. The Altarian Defense Force was fighting battles in 12 different sectors. Every ship they had was already committed to protecting the core worlds. Kepler 442b was just a mining colony on the edge of nowhere. In the grand scheme of things, 43 lives did not matter enough to risk a fleet. A child began crying somewhere behind them. Zarakai recognized the sound. It was little Morden, barely 6 years old. His parents had died on the second day when the Vorthak broke through the north gate. Since then, he had been clinging to anyone who would hold him. "Shh, little one," whispered Velnan, the young communications officer. She was holding the boy close, rocking him gently. It will be okay. But Zarakai knew it would not be okay. Nothing would be okay ever again. The ground shook as another Vorthak artillery shell hit somewhere nearby. Dust fell from the damaged ceiling. Someone screamed. Then silence returned, broken only by the distant sound of chittering voices. The Vorthak were talking to each other, probably planning their final assault. Zarakai had studied the enemy during the long siege. The Vorthak Dominion was an empire built on conquest and slavery. They moved from world to world like a plague, taking everything of value and leaving nothing but empty husks behind. Their soldiers were bred for war. 8 feet tall, covered in natural armor, with forearms that could wield weapons with deadly precision. But what made them truly dangerous was their complete lack of mercy. They did not take prisoners unless they needed slaves. They did not negotiate. They did not retreat. They simply consumed everything in their path and moved on to the next target. "Commander," called out Dr. Hesara from the makeshift medical station. "We need to talk." Zarakai made her way over to the doctor. Hesara was treating a wounded miner who had been caught in the last artillery barrage. The man's breathing was shallow and labored. "What is it, doctor?" "We are running out of medical supplies and food and ammunition." Hesara's voice was calm, but her hands shook as she worked. "At this rate, we have maybe 12 hours before we cannot treat the wounded anymore. 12 hours. Zarakai looked around at the faces of the survivors. Some were soldiers like herself, trained for combat, but most were civilians. Miners, engineers, teachers, shopkeepers. They had never asked to be heroes. They just wanted to live quiet lives on a peaceful world. "Commander, you need to see this," called out tech specialist Rangdo from the sensor station. Zarakai hurried over to the elderly technician. His 4 hands moved quickly over the damaged control panel. The display screen flickered and buzzed, but it still showed the tactical situation outside. "What am I looking at?" she asked. "Vorthak troop movements. They are massing for a final assault. All of them. Every soldier they have left." The screen showed heat signatures moving in the darkness outside the dome. Hundreds of them, more than enough to overwhelm the remaining defenses. The Vorthak had grown tired of the siege. They wanted to end this quickly. "How long do we have?" Zarakai asked. "Based on their movement patterns, maybe 3 hours. Probably less, 3 hours. Zarakai closed her eyes and tried to think. There had to be something they could do. Some way to buy more time. Some miracle that would save them. But miracles were for children's stories. This was real life. And in real life, Sometimes the good people died while the monsters won. She opened her eyes and looked at the faces around her. These people trusted her to keep them safe. They looked to her for hope. But what hope could she give them? "Listen to me, all of you," she said, raising her voice so everyone could hear. "The Vorthak are coming. This is our last stand. We cannot run. We cannot hide, but we can fight." The survivors gathered around her. Some held weapons. Others clutched children or wounded friends. All of them were afraid, but they were still here, still breathing, still willing to face whatever came next. "We are going to make them pay for every step," Zarakai continued, "for every life they have taken, for every dream they have destroyed. We may not win this battle, but we will show them that some things are worth dying for." A young miner named Kolseth stepped forward. His mining laser was old and battered, but his eyes burned with determination. "Commander, what about the children? And the wounded?" Zarakai had been dreading this question. The truth was that there was nowhere safe to put them. Nowhere to run. Nowhere to hide. "We protect them as long as we can," she said simply. "That is all we can do." Outside, the chittering voices grew louder. The Vorthak were getting ready to move. Soon, very soon, they would come pouring through the broken walls like a black tide of death and destruction. Zarakai checked her plasma rifle one last time. The power cell showed 60% charge, enough for maybe 30 shots. She hoped it would be enough. Around her, the other defenders took their positions, behind makeshift barricades, in the shadows of broken machinery, anywhere they could find cover and a clear line of fire. The waiting was the hardest part, knowing that death was coming and being able to do nothing but wait for it to arrive. But they were not alone in their fear. And they were not alone in their courage. They stood together, these last defenders of a forgotten world, and together, they would face whatever came next. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Thunderstrike and watched the stars drift past the main view screen. The human warship was 3 days into a routine patrol of the Outer Rim territories when the first distress signal reached them. The message was weak and broken, filtered through 3 relay stations and nearly lost in the cosmic background noise. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Park looked up from her communications console. Her face was pale in the blue glow of the holographic displays. She had been monitoring emergency frequencies for 6 hours straight without a break. "Captain, I am picking up another transmission from the Kepler system," she reported. "Same source as before. They are still calling for help." Morrison walked over to her station and listened to the crackling audio. The voice speaking was clearly alien, probably Altarian based on the translator patterns, but the desperation in that voice needed no translation. "How long have they been broadcasting?" Morrison asked. "This is the 4th day, sir. The signal is getting weaker each time." Morrison frowned. 4 days was a long time for anyone to hold out against a serious attack. Most colonies either got help within hours or they fell completely. The fact that these people were still alive meant they were either very lucky or very brave. "What do we know about Kepler 442b?" he asked. Commander Helen Carter pulled up the star charts on the tactical display. The planet appeared as a small green dot surrounded by empty space. It was far from any major shipping lanes or military bases. "Mining colony, sir. Population around 200. Mostly Altarians with a few other species mixed in. No strategic value that I can see. And the attackers? Based on the transmission fragments, it sounds like Vorthak raiders. Probably a small fleet looking for easy targets." Morrison had heard about the Vorthak Dominion during his briefings at headquarters. They were one of several aggressive species that had been expanding their territory over the past few years. The Galactic Coalition was stretched thin trying to respond to all the threats at once. "Sir," interrupted Chief Engineer Danny Rodriguez from his station near the back of the bridge. "I hate to be the voice of reason here, but we are just one ship. If the Vorthak have committed enough forces to keep a colony under siege for 4 days, we might be walking into something we cannot handle." Morrison understood the concern. The Thunderstrike was a good ship with a good crew, but it was not a miracle worker. Humanity was still new to galactic politics. They had joined the coalition only 2 years ago, and most alien species still saw them as primitive newcomers who had gotten lucky with their technology. "What is our current mission status?" Morrison asked. "We are supposed to complete this patrol circuit and return to base in 6 days. Carter replied. "No urgent assignments." Morrison studied the tactical display showing their current position relative to the Kepler system. It would take them almost a full day at maximum speed to reach the colony. By then, the siege might already be over. But the distress calls kept coming. Someone down there was still alive, still fighting, still hoping that help would arrive. Morrison had been in the military for 15 years, and he had learned one thing above all else. You never abandon people who are counting on you. Helm, set course for Kepler 442b, he ordered. Maximum burn. The bridge crew exchanged glances. They all knew what this meant. They were about to rush headlong into a combat situation with no backup and no clear idea of what they were facing. Sir, Carter said carefully, should we request support from the nearest coalition fleet? Negative. By the time we could get authorization and coordinate with other ships, those people will be dead. Rodriguez looked up from his engineering displays. Captain, at maximum burn we can reach the system in 18 hours. But that will put us well into the red zone on fuel consumption. We will barely have enough to get home. That is a problem for tomorrow, Morrison said. Right now our job is to get there before it is too late. The ship's engines roared to life, pushing the Thunderstrike faster than it had ever gone before. In the engineering section, Rodriguez monitored the reactor output and tried not to think about what would happen if they ran out of fuel in the middle of nowhere. On the bridge, Lisa Park continued to monitor the distress signals. Each transmission was weaker than the last. Whoever was sending them was running out of power or time or both. Captain, she called out during the 8th hour of their journey, I am getting clearer audio now that we are closer. It sounds like they are under direct assault. Heavy weapons fire in the background. Morrison listened to the transmission. Even through the static and interference, he could hear the sounds of battle. Energy weapons firing, explosions. People shouting orders in several different languages. Any response to our own transmissions? He asked. Negative, sir. Either their receivers are damaged or they are too busy fighting to monitor incoming signals. Morrison nodded. That was probably for the best. If the Vorthak intercepted human communications, they might realize that help was coming and finish off the colonists before the Thunderstrike could arrive. Captain, called out Lieutenant Kevin Walsh from the sensor station, I am detecting multiple ships in the Kepler system. Definitely Vorthak configuration. Looks like a standard raiding fleet. How many ships are we talking about? 3 vessels, sir. 1 heavy cruiser and 2 escorts, plus whatever ground forces they have deployed. Carter whistled softly. That is a lot of firepower for one colony. Morrison studied the tactical projection. 3 ships against 1 was not good odds by any measure. The Vorthak heavy cruiser alone probably outgunned the Thunderstrike by a significant margin. But Morrison had read the classified reports about Vorthak tactics. They were used to fighting other coalition species who relied heavily on energy shields and plasma weapons. They had never faced human military technology in a real battle. Commander Carter, I want a full tactical analysis of our weapon systems versus typical Vorthak defenses, Morrison ordered. Aye, sir. While Carter worked, Morrison walked over to the communications station. Lisa, prepare a message for transmission to the colony. Single burst maximum power. What should it say, sir? Morrison thought for a moment. What do you tell people who have been fighting for their lives for days? What do you say to convince them to hold on just a little longer? Tell them this, help is coming. Hold your positions. The cavalry is on the way. Lisa typed the message and sent it in a focused beam toward the planet. Whether anyone would receive it was another question entirely. Sir, Carter reported, I have completed the tactical analysis. The good news is that Vorthak shields are designed to deflect energy weapons. Our kinetic railguns should punch right through them. And the bad news? We are still outnumbered 3-1, and we have no idea what kind of ground forces they have deployed. Morrison smiled grimly. Then we will just have to be creative. The Thunderstrike continued its race through space, pushing its engines to the limit. In the crew quarters, the ship's complement of 50 Marines checked their weapons and prepared for combat. They had trained for situations like this, but most of them had never seen real action against alien enemies. Sergeant First Class Tony Russo gathered his squad leaders in the armory. Listen up, people. We are going into a hot zone with minimal intel. The enemy has had days to dig in and prepare positions. But we have one advantage they do not expect. What is that, Sergeant? Asked Corporal Amy Chen. They have never fought humans before. They do not know what we are capable of. And by the time they figure it out, it will be too late. On the bridge, Morrison watched the countdown timer tick toward 0. 17 hours and 32 minutes until they reached the Kepler system. He hoped it would be enough time. The distress signals were getting weaker. The Vorthak had broken through the eastern wall. Commander Zarakai watched in horror as the 8-foot-tall insect warriors poured through the gap, like Black Death made flesh. Their forearms moved with deadly precision, each one carrying a different weapon. Energy rifles blazed in the smoky air while their natural claws tore through metal barriers, as if they were made of paper. Behind her, the last 37 colonists pressed together in the center of the habitat dome. The children clung to their parents or to anyone who would hold them. The wounded lay on makeshift stretchers, too weak to move but still conscious enough to understand what was happening. "Fall back to the inner perimeter," Zarakai shouted over the noise of battle. Her plasma rifle was down to 20% charge. Around her, the other defenders fired desperately at the advancing enemy, but their shots barely slowed the Vorthak advance. Lieutenant Kethlo stumbled backward, his left arm hanging useless at his side. Green blood seeped through his torn uniform where Vorthak claws had found their mark. "Commander, we cannot hold them," he gasped. "There are too many." Zarakai knew he was right. The automated defenses had finally failed completely. The last of their heavy weapons had been destroyed in the morning assault. All they had left were personal weapons and the desperate courage of people who had nothing left to lose. The lead Vorthak warrior stepped through the breach in the wall. His black carapace was scarred from dozens of battles. 4 red eyes glowed with cruel intelligence as he surveyed the cornered colonists. When he spoke, his voice was like grinding metal. "Surrender now and your deaths will be quick," he announced in broken galactic standard. "Continue to resist and we will make you suffer for days." Zarakai raised her rifle and aimed at the creature's center mass. "Come and take us, you insect scum," the Vorthak leader hissed with what might have been laughter. He raised his primary weapon, a massive energy cannon that could punch through heavy armor. Around him, his warriors spread out to surround the remaining defenders. Then the sky exploded. A tremendous roar shook the entire dome as something massive burst through the atmosphere at impossible speed. The sound was unlike anything Zarakai had ever heard. It was not the smooth hum of coalition engines or the harsh scream of Vorthak drives. This was something primal and violent, like the birth cry of a metal god. Every being in the dome looked up through the cracked, transparent ceiling. High above them, a sleek gray warship dropped out of the red sky like a falling star. It was smaller than the Vorthak cruiser that had been orbiting the planet, but it moved with predatory grace that spoke of deadly purpose. The newcomer ship opened fire on the Vorthak ground positions with weapons that defied understanding. Instead of the bright beams of energy weapons, solid projectiles streaked down from orbit at incredible speed. They hit the enemy positions with the force of meteors, turning Vorthak artillery into twisted metal and scattered body parts. "What kind of weapons are those?" whispered Dr. Hessera, staring up at the battle in the sky. Zarakai had no answer. She had never seen anything like it. The projectiles moved too fast to track with the naked eye, but their effects were unmistakable. Each hit created explosions that sent shockwaves across the battlefield. The Vorthak leader snarled and activated his communications device. "Battle leader Gaxtor to unknown vessel. You will withdraw immediately or be destroyed. This world belongs to the Dominion now." The response came through the dome's damaged communication system. The voice was calm, confident, and speaking in a language Zarakai had heard before but never in a military context. "Negative, Gaxtor. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the UES Thunderstrike. You have exactly 60 seconds to begin withdrawing from this colony, or we will make you withdraw." Human. The ship was human. Zarakai felt something stir in her chest that she had not felt in days. Hope. She had heard stories about the newest members of the Galactic Coalition. Earth was a small world, with a relatively primitive industrial base. Most alien species considered them harmless newcomers who had gotten lucky with faster-than-light travel. But the ship above them was anything but harmless. Gaxtor's mandibles clicked with fury. "Foolish humans. You are one ship against my fleet. My cruiser alone has more firepower than your entire species. Surrender now and your death will be swift." 30 seconds, Morrison replied in the same calm tone. The Vorthak leader gestured to his warriors, and they resumed their advance toward the colonists. But now they moved more cautiously, unsure about the new threat from above. High in orbit, the human ship suddenly accelerated toward the Vorthak cruiser with reckless abandon. Instead of the careful maneuvering that most species used in space combat, The Thunderstrike dove straight at its target like a missile seeking its mark. The Vorthak cruiser opened fire with its main batteries. Brilliant beams of coherent energy lanced out toward the human ship. But the Thunderstrike was already moving, rolling and spinning through 3 dimensions with an agility that seemed impossible for something so large. Then the human ship returned fire. The weapons were like nothing in the galactic database. Instead of energy beams or plasma bolts, the Thunderstrike launched solid projectiles at speeds that approached a significant fraction of light speed. The Vorthak shields, designed to deflect energy weapons, offered no protection against chunks of metal moving at relativistic velocities. The first salvo punched through the cruiser's shields and hull like they were made of tissue paper. Secondary explosions bloomed along the ship's flank as atmosphere vented into space. The Vorthak vessel staggered under the impact, its elegant curves marred by gaping holes. "Impossible," breathed tech specialist Rangdo, watching the tactical display in amazement. Their shields should have stopped those projectiles, but Zarakai was beginning to understand. Energy shields worked by deflecting or absorbing energy-based attacks. They were useless against solid matter moving at extreme velocity. The humans had found a way to make kinetic weapons practical in space combat. The battle above continued with a violence that was both beautiful and terrifying. The Vorthak cruiser tried to bring its superior firepower to bear, but the human ship was simply too fast and too unpredictable. It moved like a living thing, dancing between enemy fire while delivering devastating attacks of its own. On the ground, the Vorthak warriors had stopped their advance to stare up at the sky. They had never seen their mighty fleet challenged so successfully. Their entire tactical doctrine was based on the assumption that they had the best weapons and the strongest ships. The human vessel proved that assumption wrong. "All Vorthak ground forces. This is Captain Morrison," came the voice over the communication system. "You have 2 choices. Surrender immediately and be taken prisoner, or be eliminated along with your fleet. You have 1 minute to decide." Gaxtor roared his defiance and ordered his warriors to resume the attack. If his fleet was doomed, he would at least complete his mission and destroy the colony. But as the Vorthak charged toward the colonists, new contacts appeared on the tactical display. Small objects were falling from the human ship, streaking through the atmosphere like shooting stars. "What are those?" asked Lieutenant Kethlo. Zarakai watched the objects growing larger as they approached the surface. They were too small to be ships, but too large to be weapons. As they got closer, she could see that they were some kind of armored pods. Drop troops, she realized. The humans are sending soldiers. The first pod crashed through the roof of a Vorthak supply depot half a kilometer away. The explosion sent debris flying in all directions. Before the dust had settled, an armored figure emerged from the wreckage. The human soldier was encased in bulky powered armor that made him look more like a walking tank than a person. In his hands was a weapon that began firing immediately, sending streams of projectiles into nearby Vorthak positions. More pods landed throughout the area. Each one disgorged another armored warrior who began systematically eliminating enemy positions. The humans moved with a coordination and aggression that was unlike anything Zarakai had ever witnessed. They were not trying to defeat the Vorthak. They were trying to destroy them completely. "This is Sergeant Russo, UES Marines," came a new voice over the communication system. "All Tyrian forces, stay down and mark your positions. We are coming to get you out of there." Above them, the Vorthak cruiser finally succumbed to the relentless human assault. The great ship broke apart in a series of explosions that lit up the sky like a second sun. The escort vessels, seeing their flagship destroyed, began to retreat toward the edge of the system. The humans had won. Sergeant First Class Tony Russo hit the ground running as his drop pod's doors blew off with explosive charges. The impact had driven his armored boots 6 inches into the rocky soil of Kepler 442b, but the powered exoskeleton absorbed the shock without trouble. Around him, 49 other human Marines were landing in similar fashion across the battlefield. The first thing that struck Russo about the Vorthak was how big they were. Intelligence reports had mentioned 8 feet in height, but seeing them in person was different. The insect-like aliens towered over human height with 4 arms that moved independently of each other. Their natural armor looked thick enough to stop small arms fire. That was fine. Russo was not carrying small arms. His M77 assault rifle spat armor-piercing rounds at 3,000 rounds per minute. The tungsten core bullets punched through Vorthak carapaces like they were made of cardboard. The alien warrior he had been aiming at staggered backward with green blood spraying from multiple holes in its chest. "Marine Squad Alpha, form up on me," Russo shouted into his helmet communicator. "We have civilians to extract from the central dome." The tactical display in his visor showed the positions of his team members scattered across a 2-kilometer area. Each Marine was equipped with enough firepower to level a city block, and they intended to use every bit of it. Corporal Amy Chen landed her pod directly on top of a Vorthak command bunker. The impact crushed the structure and everything inside it. She emerged from the wreckage with her heavy machine gun already spinning up to firing speed. "Contact multiple targets. 200 meters east," she reported as her weapon began chewing through enemy positions. The Vorthak had never encountered human military doctrine before. Most coalition species fought with energy weapons that required time to charge between shots. They used elegant tactics that minimized collateral damage and avoided unnecessary casualties. Humans fought like they wanted to kill everything that moved. Private Bobby Martinez set up his rocket launcher behind a piece of twisted metal that had once been part of a mining vehicle. His first shot turned a Vorthak artillery piece into a crater. His second shot eliminated an entire squad of enemy soldiers who had been trying to flank the Marine positions. "This is too easy," Martinez muttered as he loaded his third rocket. "They fight like they have never seen real weapons before." The truth was that they had not. Vorthak military technology was designed around the assumption that everyone else in the galaxy used similar energy-based weapon systems. Their armor and shields were optimized to defend against plasma bolts and laser beams. Nobody had bothered to armor against chunks of metal moving at hypersonic velocities. Staff Sergeant Linda Brooks coordinated the Marine advance from her position near the colony's main gate. Her job was to make sure all 50 Marines worked together as a single devastating unit, instead of 50 individual soldiers. "Squad Bravo, I need you to clear the eastern approach," she ordered. "Squad Charlie, take the high ground on that ridge. Squad Delta, sweep south and eliminate any enemy fallback positions." The Marines moved with a precision that came from years of training together. Each squad knew exactly what the others were doing without needing constant communication. They flowed across the battlefield like water, always taking the path of least resistance while applying maximum force to enemy weak points. The Vorthak tried to adapt. Battle leader Gaxtor reorganized his remaining ground forces into a defensive perimeter around the habitat dome. If he could not win the battle, he would at least complete his mission by eliminating the colonists. But human Marines had trained for exactly this type of urban combat scenario. Corporal Steve Anderson approached the dome from the north with his squad. Instead of charging directly at the enemy positions, they used the rubble and debris as cover while calling in precision fire support from the Thunderstrike in orbit. Thunderstrike Actual, this is Marine Ground Team, requesting orbital bombardment on grid reference 77 Alpha. Danger close to friendly forces. Captain Morrison's voice came back immediately. Confirmed, Ground Team. Orbital strike incoming in 30 seconds. All Marines take cover. The kinetic bombardment from space hit the Vorthak positions with the force of a tactical nuclear weapon but without the radiation. Tungsten rods dropped from orbit reached terminal velocity and transferred all their energy into whatever they hit. The explosions sent shockwaves rippling across the battlefield. When the dust settled, half the enemy defensive positions had simply ceased to exist. Inside the habitat dome, Commander Zarakai watched the human assault with a mixture of awe and terror. She had spent her entire military career learning about tactics and strategy from the coalition military academies. Everything she knew about warfare suggested that the humans were doing everything wrong. They used too much firepower. They moved too aggressively. They took unnecessary risks. They showed no concern for collateral damage or resource conservation. And yet they were winning decisively against an enemy that had held her people under siege for a week. "Commander, look at this," called out tech specialist Rangdo from his damaged sensor station. "The human soldiers are advancing on foot toward enemy positions. No air support, no armored vehicles, just soldiers in suits." Zarakai studied the tactical display. The human Marines were indeed walking directly into enemy fire. But their armor seemed to deflect or absorb everything the Vorthak threw at them. Energy weapons that should have melted through metal just sparked harmlessly off the human suits. What kind of technology are they using? She wondered aloud. The answer became clear as she watched one of the Marines take a direct hit from a Vorthak energy cannon. The blast would have vaporized any Coalition soldier instantly. The human staggered slightly, checked his armor systems, and then resumed firing. Ablative plating, Dr. Hesara observed. Their armor is designed to absorb energy attacks by sacrificing outer layers. Primitive but effective. But it was more than just their equipment that made the humans so effective. It was their approach to combat itself. Coalition forces fought to achieve military objectives with minimum casualties. They valued elegance and efficiency. Humans fought to destroy their enemies as completely and quickly as possible. Sergeant Russo reached the dome's outer wall and began placing explosive charges along the base of a Vorthak strongpoint. The aliens inside were firing frantically at his position, but their energy weapons barely scratched his armors. "Surface, fire in the hole," he announced over the radio before triggering the charges. The explosion brought down the entire structure and everyone inside it. Russo moved immediately to the next target without pausing to check for survivors. Behind him, his squad followed the same pattern. Identify enemy position, apply overwhelming firepower, move to next target. There was no negotiation, no attempts at capture, no mercy for enemies who had threatened innocent civilians. Battle leader Gaxtor found himself trapped in the command bunker with only a dozen warriors left alive. Around him, the sounds of battle were growing closer as the human Marines systematically eliminated every Vorthak position. "All units, fall back to the secondary perimeter," he ordered desperately, but there was no response. All his other units were either dead or had lost communication. The bunker's main door exploded inward in a shower of metal fragments. Through the smoke came a figure in bulky armor carrying a weapon that looked like it belonged in a nightmare. "Surrender, and you will be treated according to the galactic conventions," the human said in mechanical-sounding galactic. Standard Gaxtor raised his energy rifle and fired at point-blank range. The blast should have killed any living creature instantly. The human Marine took a half-step backward from the impact, looked down at the scorch mark on his chest plate, and then raised his own weapon. "Your choice," he said simply. The battle for Kepler 442b lasted exactly 3 hours and 17 minutes from the moment the first human drop pod hit the ground. When it ended, every Vorthak ground force had been eliminated. The orbital battle had concluded even faster, with the enemy fleet either destroyed or fleeing toward the edge of the system. Commander Zarakai stood in the ruins of what had been her command post and tried to process what she had witnessed. A single human ship with 50 Marines had accomplished what an entire coalition fleet might have struggled to achieve, and they had done it to save people they had never met on a world they had never seen, simply because someone had called for help. The age of human involvement in galactic affairs had begun with a very clear message: mess with innocent people at your own risk. Captain Jake Morrison stepped carefully through the wreckage of the habitat dome and surveyed the aftermath of the battle. The air still smelled of smoke and burned metal, but the sounds of combat had been replaced by the quiet voices of his Marines helping wounded colonists. 3 hours ago, this place had been a war zone. Now it was a rescue operation. Commander Zarakai approached him slowly, her 4 eyes taking in every detail of his appearance. Morrison had removed his helmet, revealing a surprisingly ordinary human face. He was younger than she had expected, with brown hair and calm blue eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. "Captain Morrison," she said in careful galactic standard, "I am Commander Zarakai of the Alterian Defense Force. On behalf of everyone here, I want to thank you for what you have done." Morrison nodded politely. "Just doing our job, Commander. How are your people holding up?" Zarakai looked around at the survivors. Dr. Hesara was treating the wounded with medical supplies that the human Marines had brought with them. The children who had been crying in terror just hours before were now gathered around Sergeant Russo, fascinated by his bulky armor and strange weapons. "Better than I expected," she admitted. "We lost many friends over the past week, but those who remain are alive because of you." "I am sorry for your losses," Morrison said simply. "No one should have to go through what you experienced." There was something in his tone that made Zarakai study his face more carefully. She had expected the humans to be proud of their victory, maybe even boastful about their superior tactics and weapons. Instead, Morrison seemed genuinely sad about the death and destruction that had taken place. "Captain, may I ask you something?" she said. "Of course. Why did you come?" Your ship was alone, outnumbered by enemy forces, according to everything I know about military strategy. You should have called for reinforcements and waited for support. Morrison was quiet for a moment, watching one of his Marines help an elderly Alterian to his feet. Commander, where I come from, we have a saying. Leave no one behind. When someone calls for help, we answer. The odds don't matter. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Park approached from the communications station that her team had set up in the ruins. Captain, we are receiving multiple transmissions from across the sector. Word about the battle is spreading fast. Morrison turned to face her. What kind of transmissions? Colonies requesting assistance, sir. At least a dozen so far. Some are under attack. Others are reporting Vorthak ships moving toward their systems. Zarakai felt a chill run down her spine. The Vorthak rarely attack just one target at a time. This colony was probably part of a larger offensive. Morrison nodded grimly. That makes sense. Take out the isolated settlements first, then move on to bigger targets once you have secured your supply lines. Commander Helen Carter approached with a tactical display showing the local star systems. Red markers indicated confirmed Vorthak activities while yellow markers showed unconfirmed reports. Sir, based on these reports, it looks like they are hitting at least 15 different worlds simultaneously. Most of them are mining colonies or research stations with minimal defenses. Morrison studied the display. Each red marker represented hundreds or thousands of lives at risk. The Coalition defense forces were already stretched thin, fighting multiple threats across the galaxy. There was no way they could respond to every call for help. How long would it take us to reach the nearest colony under attack? He asked. Carter checked her calculations. The research station at Proxima 7 is about 6 hours away at maximum burn. But sir, our fuel reserves are already running low after this engagement. What about ammunition and supplies? We used about 30% of our kinetic rounds in the orbital battle. The Marines expended roughly 40% of their equipment. We could handle maybe one more engagement of this size. Morrison looked around at the faces of his crew. They were tired from the battle, but none of them seemed reluctant to continue fighting. They understood what was at stake. Sir, interrupted Sergeant Russo as he walked over from the group of children, the Marines are ready to move out whenever you give the order. These Vorthak bastards need to learn that there are consequences for attacking innocent people. Morrison smiled at his sergeant's enthusiasm. What do you think, Russo? Can your people handle another fight? Sir, we signed up to protect people who cannot protect themselves. That is exactly what we have been doing. If there are more colonies that need help, then we go help them. Dr. Hessera approached the group with little Morden holding her hand. The 6-year-old Alterian boy looked up at Morrison with wide eyes full of curiosity rather than fear. Captain, this child wanted to thank you personally, the doctor said. His parents died in the early fighting, but he says he wants to be a soldier like you when he grows up. Morrison knelt down to the boy's eye level. You do not need to be a soldier to help people, little one. Doctors help people. Teachers help people. Engineers and farmers and shopkeepers all help people in their own ways. The boy nodded solemnly, but his eyes remained fixed on Morrison's uniform and the weapons his Marines carried. Zarakai watched this interaction with growing understanding. The humans had not come here for glory or conquest or resources. They had come because someone needed help, and they had stayed until the job was finished. Captain, she said, before you leave, there is something you should know. The Vorthak will not forget what happened here today. They will see your intervention as a direct challenge to their expansion plans. Morrison stood and faced her. Good. Maybe that will make them think twice before attacking more colonies. You do not understand. The Vorthak do not back down from challenges. They will send larger fleets, more soldiers. They will hunt for human worlds to attack in retaliation. Then we will be ready for them, Morrison said calmly, and so will our allies. Lieutenant Commander Park looked up from her communication station again. Captain, I am receiving a priority transmission from Coalition Command. They want a full report on our engagement with Vorthak forces. Morrison nodded. Send them everything. Tactical data, weapons effectiveness, enemy capabilities. Make sure every Coalition commander knows what we learned here today. As the human crew prepared to depart, word of the battle began spreading throughout the galaxy. The story grew with each telling, but the basic facts remained the same. A single human warship had appeared from nowhere to save a doomed colony, destroying a superior enemy force and rescuing everyone who could be saved. Within days, the Vorthak High Command issued new standing orders to all their fleet commanders. Human ships were to be considered extremely dangerous and engaged only with overwhelming force. Any colony that received human protection was to be bypassed until larger forces could be assembled. Other aggressive species began to reconsider their expansion plans as well. The galaxy had always been governed by the assumption that technological superiority guaranteed victory in battle. The humans had proven that assumption wrong. Commander Zarakai stood in the ruins of her colony and watched the thunderstrike disappear into hyperspace. She knew that the humans were heading toward another battle, another desperate colony that needed help. She also knew that they would keep fighting until every innocent person in the galaxy was safe, no matter what the cost. The age of human intervention had begun with a simple promise: no cry for help would go unanswered. In the months and years that followed, that promise would reshape the balance of power across the entire galaxy. The Vorthak Dominion would learn to fear the sound of human engines. Other predatory species would find their victims, suddenly protected by warriors who seemed to appear from nowhere whenever they were needed most, and peaceful colonies throughout the outer rim would sleep better knowing that somewhere in the void, human ships were burning hard toward anyone who dared threaten the innocent. Humanity had found its place in the galactic community, not through diplomacy or trade, but through the simple act of standing up for those who could not stand up for themselves.